ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me here. My presentation, as already introduced, is now dealing with the European market. So we make the big jump from US to Europe. And I'm very happy to present you here the latest requirements, recently very brand new. And I'm happy to share you some insights, especially from the perspective of a technical service. And I'm starting my speech with somehow a dream, driving autonomously. I guess most of us are dreaming from that kind of situation where we are just relaxing in the car and driving from A to B without thinking how to or making some worries about the traffic jam or whatever. But as you can imagine, it is not so easy, unfortunately, not yet, because we have to overcome some issues, I have to say, especially if it comes to automated driving, because we have to manage somehow the compliance with the traffic regulations. And this is something which is, as more and more regulations are coming into force, as more we are recognizing the traffic regulation has nothing to do with the vehicle performance. Traffic regulation is the behavior on the streets, and this is something which is difficult to translate this kind of behavior rules for humans into machine technology, and this is also something which will come up more and more after the technology is ready. We also have to ensure a smooth traffic because otherwise, if the vehicle, which is driven by a computer, is too careful, it anyway will also create some other stuff and other problems, especially if we are having a traffic which is mixed between driven human being driver and automated vehicles driver. So this is also something which we have to keep in mind in the future. Another topic which coming up also with the new requirements is the trust and reproducibility of new test methods. I will come to that point later on, but as you can imagine, new test methods are coming into force, and we also have to take care that they are as same trustful as we did it also in the past. Last but not least, hazard and risks within the operating area. More or less the real world is really an adventure park, and we have to also consider really the unexpected issues and hazards which will come up sooner or later. And now, really last but not least, the scenario variety, which we have to manage also in that simulation world, as we have to take care about almost every real traffic situation which can happen, and taking this into account already during the development as well as in the homologation process. And these are some of the challenges will come up to us, and which this kind of challenges cannot be solved by the regulation. So I have to apologize. The regulation will help us a lot, but this kind of additional problems will come up later on anyway. Also Stefan mentioned it before. In the past, I have to say, still until the current situation, the technology is ahead of us. The technology for AVs, automated and autonomous vehicles, is somehow advanced, but the regulations are lacking behind. And in between, we have, of course, some industry standards which are helping at the moment to support the development, but if it comes really to the final approval, we have still some missing requirements which are covering that aspect. And what should I say? The reason why I'm standing here on the stage is I give you some insights about the first level 4 requirement, which is now enforced, and hoping also that this gap between the technology, the industry standards, and the requirements are somehow is getting smaller, and we will see some progress on that end. Before I'm doing so, I am just one slide showing somehow what is the hierarchy in the European approval system. Because before the question from the colleague from SsangYong was like, we already have the UN ECE 157, which is ALKS, Automatic Landscaping Assistance System. So how this fits to US? It actually not really fits to US because it's the scope is the UN ECE, which is the union, not part of the European Union, but the European Union is adopting it, so it's also member of the WP29 group. So means this is the highest level. UN ECE requirements are the highest level. They are above the European Union, but European Union is notifying that ones. So then the blue one with the flag of the European Union shows somehow the relevant requirement and regulation for the whole vehicle type approval, which is the 2018-858. This is the recent enforced requirement for the whole vehicle type approval in Europe. Just 1.5 weeks ago, there was the enforcement of the 2019-2144, which is also well known as the general safety, GSR2. And this GSR2 also contains the possibility to approve level 4 vehicles. So everything I'm talking about is somehow all related to that requirement. But European Union is also, they are not only a country, so the implementation on the countryside also has to be done. And this is the green box covering the national implementation. And the national implementation is then represented by the approval authorities, which are located in the specific member state countries. And Stefan also mentioned the most famous one is luckily the one in Germany, the KBA. They are the most advanced one. And TUV SUD, coming to the orange box, is the designated technical service of the KBA, but also of other ones. But as KBA has, in that case, the highest relevance, I'm just pointing out that one. So this was somehow just the introduction. Now we are coming to the topic of today, or of the second presentation session. It's the EU Level 4 requirement, which is somehow, as already mentioned, part of the 2008-58. So this is the whole vehicle type approval standard, or requirement I have to say, and comes along with the general safety too. The general safety is somehow implemented in the type approval process, so that means the requirement for level 4 autonomous vehicle is also part of the type approval process. So we have two steps. We have the vehicle itself, and we have the functionality, AD, automated driving system functionality, which is on top and be part of that type approval process. I made some overview what kind of puzzle pieces are involved, but I will come to that closer later. But just for your reference, we have different use cases. We have SOTIF implemented, we have functional safety audits implemented, we have the in-service reporting implemented, which is a manufacturer responsibility. And this is something where the EU and the UN ECE are come together. We have certain requirements according to cybersecurity and software updates. And this kind of two requirements, cybersecurity and software updates, are not somehow mentioned with independent requirements in the EU Level 4, but they are just referring to the relevant UN ECE requirements. Just to put it into a nutshell, what is new with this EU Level 4? Compare also to ALKS. Audit is a part of the approval process. Simulation and validation of simulation tools and tool chains, we come to that also later. So simulation is a part of the homologation process, which is not really new, but the validation of the simulation tools, this is something which is new and come in with this new EU Level 4. And last but not least, real road testing is a mandatory part of the homologation process. And on the right-hand side, you can see somehow the timeline, but it shows a weird situation because the requirement is already in force, even if it's not published. Yeah, so we are waiting every day on the publishment, and then you will also see a certain number, like for example, the 2018-858. Also, a certain approval or a certain regulation number will be somehow appointed to the EU Level 4 as soon as it is published. So this is something which we are expecting within the next weeks. So this was very top level, and now the rest of my speech, we will have a closer look into the EU Level 4, as it is somehow also a new concept of type approval process. So those of you which are familiar with the type approval process, maybe dealing for homologation activities, European market for years, they will also be surprised how many new aspects are implemented in that approval process. So all our daily life, which are, or who of you are in charge of the homologation process, they also have to adapt. Just for your understanding, this is very top-level explained, and therefore also I recap somehow the approval process. So compared to US market and also Korean market, where we have a self-certification system, in Europe we rely on a third-party principle. That means, as already explained, we have three parties involved. The first one, of course, is the vehicle manufacturer. Second one is the approval authority, and third one is the technical service, which I put TUV SUD as a representative of that. In general, the manufacturer is responsible for the product, of course. The approval authority is for the overall approval process responsible, and the technical service is somehow the testing body in behalf of the approval authority. So now digging into the requirements, I put this example because the Ioniq 5 is a very good example. So in general, Hyundai is somehow the type approval owner of the Ioniq 5, and this is a normal traditional way. The vehicle itself got a European type approval and is therefore allowed to be operated on European roads. I took the example of Motional, because they're using the Ioniq 5 in order to build up or develop a robotaxi. So the Ioniq 5 is equipped with additional sensors. They have a LiDAR, radar, and whatever else equipment on board. And now coming to the EU regulation, it would be somehow possible to have a multi-stage approval. Yeah? The EU Level 4 allows a multi-stage approval. That means, in our example case, if Hyundai would somehow provide the type approval as a basis, Motional can set up on that type approval as a basis and add on top the EU Level 4 approval. And then this would allow Motional to operate that vehicles in European Union. Yeah? This is somehow the approach. Of course, it's not necessary, so it could be also the case that Hyundai is doing the whole approval process for the AV function as a whole and just put one type approval. But this is an additional feature of the EU Level 4, allowing system suppliers also to get a type approval for the maybe not own manufactured basic vehicle. Yeah? This is something which allows additional opportunities. So coming to the scope of the EU Level 4, and yeah, as you can imagine, EU Level 4 is now the game changer in Level 4 technology. But on the other side, if there is a lot of light, then there is also some shadow. And now with the next two slides, I'm coming to the shadow, because it's not all good with this first EU Level 4 requirement, because as you can see on the use cases, number one is the goods and people transport in urban environment. So that means you have a certain area where you have to predefine, and then within this area you can freely operate. But on the other side, it is limited to urban area. So if you want to go on the highway, this first use case will be somehow not relevant to you. For that case, there would be the number two, the hub-to-hub transportation. The problem on the hub-to-hub transportation is that you have to predefine the start and the end point of your route. So the route itself is not clearly defined, but you have to at least define the starting point and the end point of your vehicle, which is also somehow limiting the availability of that requirement. And number 3, I would say, is the most advanced, or not most advanced one, but the most implemented one. It is the automated valet parking, which will be somehow the starting phase, I guess, because the technology is already very advanced and manufacturers will reach out to that as first. I mentioned 2 negative aspects. The second negative aspect or weak point of the requirement is that this is not yet unlimited. So the European Commission is also a little bit careful, and they do not want to enable their roads from 0 to 100 for AVs. So they started in a smaller way, which means small series type approval. So if once a vehicle manufacturer or an AV system supplier is applying for the type approval, the maximum vehicles which can run under that type approval is 1,500 for whole Europe and maximum 200 vehicles per each member state. This is the maximum. Yeah? Otherwise, so the approval is no longer valid and you have to apply for another one. But there is already a positive sign from the European Commission, so they will track somehow the first year, which will be this until the end of this year in 2023, and in 2024 they will decide to redo or remove this kind of limitation, and it's already very positive because a lot of manufacturers are pushing on that end. That the limitation for the small series type approval will be removed from 2024 on. Yeah? Then it is unlimited. So now going into deep with the EU level 4 for automated driving systems. First of all, I want to show you somehow the general overview, what's in that requirement. And as usual, the general part is somehow giving the indication, making some definitions about the operational design domain, defining the vehicle categories. Annex 2 is related to the information folders, so this gives somehow the indication and the requirements, what kind of documentation, vehicle type documentation the manufacturer has to deliver. And as you can imagine, this is something which is also creating a lot of question marks, how deep we have to go as manufacturers and as a technical service, what kind of documentation is really required. And as this is really top-end, top-notch technology, there is also the possibility to put somehow a documentation package which is confidential and which relies on the manufacturer responsibility. So this kind of package is then only accessible if really the type approval authority is demanding it specially. But usually you have a package which is part of the type approval process, and another part of the documentation will keep in the manufacturer's hand and will be just somehow requested for opening if there are some issues or any trust issues coming from the approval authority. Number 2, Annex 2, is the regulatory requirements for the performance level of the Aeds. And yeah, this is actually, just to give you a feeling, this is just around 15 pages. And the definition, they are just considering head points or bullet points, but actually the manufacturer is in the responsibility to put the right documentation behind that in order to feed up that kind of requirements. The Annex 3 is the most important one for us as a technical service perspective, because here really the definition of the compliance assessment is done. And this means what to test, how to test, what kind of additional requirements are in. So this is somehow where it is a most concrete what kind of homologation test has to be executed. And just for your reference, so Annex 2 is around 15 pages, Annex 3 is around 50 pages. So there's definitely more efforts in to go through. Annex 4 is then just for administration purpose, the template of the approval certificate, which is part of every European requirement, so nothing special. So having a quick look into Annex 2, these are the performance requirements. Important, and therefore I want to point it out, are the DTT, which is the dynamic driving task as a short form under nominal traffic situations, the DTT under critical traffic scenarios, and the DTT under failure scenarios. Why I want to point that out? Because these are the ones which are especially interesting also for the safety assessment later on. So this is the technical service doing the homologation process. They will dig into that kind of scenarios because they will evaluate according to that scenarios and critical situations also the safety concept of the vehicle type. In addition, you have somehow requirements for the periodic roadworthiness tests. So this is something the vehicle manufacturer, the responsibility of the vehicle manufacturer is not ending at that point where the vehicle is in the market, but the vehicle manufacturer still has to track the vehicles on the road and has to do also regular reporting to the approval authorities, especially if there are some issues or incidents. The approval authority is expecting very detailed reporting on that end, which shows a little bit where self-certification and type approval process are coming together, as the manufacturer responsibility will not end at the time point where the type approval is issued. In addition, just very briefly, functional safety and operational safety, I will go into that very later on because it's a very big part of the assessment, of the safety assessment. We have cybersecurity and software management, which can be somehow easily managed because here the relevant requirements from UN ECE 155 and 156 are already in place. So there's just a reference to refer to them to fulfill the requirements. We have the event data recorder, we have minimum risk maneuver and condition, and we have some designated requirements for the human-machine interface. Yeah, now coming to the most important one, the Annex 3, because it's the testing one, and if my speech is somehow from the perspective of a technical service, of course, this will be the most relevant for us also in the type approval process. And the EU level 4 is somehow continuing the idea of a multi-pillar approach. Those of you which are already in charge of maybe ALKS requirements and type approval testing, or maybe having long-time relationship with the test procedures and test scenarios of automated vehicles, the multi-pillar approach will be nothing new to you, but it will be somehow, in that case, extended because we have new specific processes which are implemented in that. So just very briefly, we're starting with an audit, which followed by an assessment. Based on that, the purpose is to develop the process and the V&V strategies to assess somehow the safety concept with the core of the safety assessment. We are checking out the simulation results and of course checking also out the reproducibility and the trustworthiness of simulation results. Then we are turning to the physical certification testing, which is also still, which is traditional business in case of homologation, but will be also a core factor of the homologation process of the future. Here we are assessing the system behavior in order to find out also the challenging cases. Also here, the validation and audit is somehow influencing also the testing, because we are considering, once again, if you remember, we have the nominal scenarios, we have the critical scenarios, and we also have failure scenarios, and all this kind of scenarios will be tested on the proving ground. Last but not least, as the top of the pyramid, we are also executing real-world test drive. So even within the type approval process, there will be some part which is relevant for the type approval testing. And so TÜV SÜD is currently working on the test procedures like that. And just for your information, in Germany, the TÜV SÜD is also responsibility for the driver license test. And we are at the moment in very close communication also with the relevant approval authorities, and the real world test drive will be something similar like a driver license test. And this is also something where we are currently defining the requirements and also somehow the challenges and boundary conditions, and this will be part of the usual type approval process, that one inspector is really physically sitting in the car and try to define some pre-route definitions and then checking the behavior of the vehicle in the real road, which is like, if you remember, similar to your own driver license test. So now I want to show you somehow the pillars which are relevant and which are building the house, the type approval house for the EU level 4 approval, as we have different aspects and we have to cover them case by case, and all that are separated, relevant and separate pillars which then finally contribute to build up the complete house of the type approval. Starting with the very left one, and I made this yellow line in between, separating it a little bit to the rest of the house pillars, because the audit of the safety management system is something very special. And this is something which is new to the type approval process, because it is somehow just a single activity or independent from the type approval process. So before you can go and approve your vehicle for according to EU level 4, you have to do this kind of audit for this safety management system. This is in order to ensure that the manufacturer has a certain quality level and is capable to manage the development process in a safety and reliable way. And in order to do so, in order to give this trust to the manufacturer and the future type approval holder, the authority wants to do and execute somehow the audit before, and after the audit is done and successfully done, the rest of the type approval process can be executed. So all in all, it's like a mathematical calculation. So you have to put all the pillars together, and then finally you will end up with a system type approval. And the audit for the safety management system is somehow independent prerequisite in order to start the process. So starting with the first one, the audit for the safety management system, how it looks like. This safety management system is something which is implemented or should be implemented in the manufacturer processes. It is not a separate process, but we as a technical service, we want to see that the manufacturer is somehow capable to manage with the risks and the special requirements which are somehow related to the development of automated and autonomous driving functions. And the question is now, what are the ingredients for that? What is the basis? The basis is, of course, the requirement itself, the EU level 4, but also audit management systems like the 19011, but more important also like the ISO 26262, which is the functional safety requirements, and also the 21448, which is representative for the SOTIF requirements. And all of that are somehow relevant for the vehicle manufacturer in order to have certain safety processes in place, which ensuring liable and the trustful development of such kind of complex technology. And so maybe just sharing why this is necessary and why this was not in the past, because automated vehicles will reach somehow conditions which cannot be tested 100% in advance. So you have to somehow believe the manufacturer that he did everything what is somehow under his possibilities in order to ensure really the safety of that vehicle. So it will be never 100% safe, but at least with the audit of the safety management system, it is ensured that the manufacturer is trying the best in order to ensure somehow safety over the whole process and even beyond that, until end of life cycle. So how this process looked like? So first of all, of course, like every audit, there will be the planning of the audit. Then we have a pre-audit. Just maybe I forgot to mention, we have here a two-stage audit, which representing the first stage is the documentation check, and the second stage is then the on-site audit. So we are defining the vehicle manufacturer documentation. So we want to have a look on the documentation. We want to see how, for example, the functional safety process is implemented, how there is the relation between SOTIF aspects and functional safety. We want to see how cybersecurity is implemented in the safety quality. If there is a certain measures, how is the documentation? And then after reviewing the vehicle manufacturer's documentation, of course, we are doing the second step, which is represented by stage 2. And then we're starting somehow the on-site inspection and checking if the vehicle manufacturer's documentation is really implemented in reality. And this is the typical audit behavior where we have a look what kind of deviations will be found. And actually, there is a four-level evaluation matrix available. The number one is somehow positive findings. So if the implementation of the manufacturer is somehow better than what the requirement is defined, then we have somehow a general finding which is in a neutral condition. But not relevant to the audit result. And then we have, of course, the minor finding, and then we are ending up in the critical side. So minor findings, for that we have to find or to define somehow solvings, root cause analysis, and somehow providing a certain measurement, a certain measure from the manufacturer how to fix that minor findings. And last but not least, which is the critical ones, the critical findings. And here usually the audit is not passed, and some more deeper correction from the manufacturer is required. So we are defining this together with the manufacturer. Then finally the whole audit report will be provided to the approval authority, and finally the approval authority is defining the time frame for closing. So it's not in the responsibility of the technical service or of the manufacturer when it's okay. So the final decision of the safety management audit is done by the approval authority. So the approval authority is finally deciding, yes, the safety management system is okay, and the certification can be granted. So what is the time-wise process on that? We have a 4 years frequency, so it means every third year we have to do an on-site audit. For second and third year, we have only surveillance documentation or surveillance check, where we are digging into some certain processes. They are already predefined in the requirements. Just for your example, we have a look on the in-service reporting from the manufacturer. So the manufacturer is enforced to provide a very detailed documentation about the vehicles which are in the market and which are on the road. If there are any critical situation and scenarios where happened, or in worst case, if there are any problems or any accidents, then this kind of reporting has to be done ad hoc by the vehicle manufacturer. And during the surveillance audits, we are checking this if the manufacturer is somehow following that up. Coming to the safety assessment of the vehicle system. So audit was done. This is just a one-time job. Now we are coming to the safety assessment, which is the first step of the real type approval process. Here we have to differentiate between also two aspects. We are focusing on the one hand side on the document-based assessment. So this is also having a look on the specific vehicle definition, having a look on the specific processes, having a look on the safety concept, having a look on the vehicle architecture. And so this is something which we are going through. And I'm just informing what verification tests later on will follow up. they also followed up based on the findings within the safety assessment, on the document-based assessment. We will later on put some findings into the consideration about the test planning for the physical testing then later on. And also here, a short overview about the assessment process for the safety architecture. We are, first of all, in the practical way, the technical service will provide a list with definition of required documents. Then we will have a kick-off workshop. We will do the scoping of the vehicle, so really defining what is the vehicle type, what are the configurations, what are the relevant systems following under that, so which kind of variants and versions are covered. Then the documents will be provided by the vehicle manufacturer. Next step is the document review, which means the document provided by the manufacturer are reviewed and checked. Afterwards, there will be the clarification workshop in order to have some alignment, because due to the complexity of the documentation, it is expected that maybe not every and each single point will be clear. So here we will have a clarification workshop in order to align between the technical service and the vehicle manufacturer. And afterwards, there will be the verification and of the concept, which is a derivation out of the document review and the clarification workshop. So here is an interconnection between the safety assessment and the testing later on. And maybe this sounds very top level, how it looks in reality. We are actually currently developing and creating checklists, because this kind of safety assessment is purely based on checklists. And here we are using the requirement as a basis and cascading down the specific requirement details and defining the fulfillment criteria based on that requirement details. And I put on the right top side an example how this kind of checklist looked like. This is then means our experts are also on site at the manufacturer side and going through all the documentation and all the questionnaire checklists in order to somehow get a complete picture about the safety concept of the vehicle and the implementation in the vehicle architecture. So as I already pointed out, during the surveillance audit, a very strong focus will be on the manufacturer duties. And one of the duties is, of course, the reporting. And as I mentioned, the responsibility of the vehicle manufacturer will not end at that point where the type approval is issued, but it will remain until the vehicle is somehow end of life. And here the vehicle manufacturer has some reporting requirements. Already mentioned them, the in-service reporting, which requires a regular and ad hoc reporting. We will have somehow the criteria, as you see on the slide. We have the safety critical known to the manufacturer. We have the operation outside the ODD, which is also a critical issue. The failure to achieve minimal risk condition, and the identification of safety relevant scenarios. May during the development process, not all safety critical and safety relevant scenarios were considered, but if during the operation of the vehicles somehow you will track new scenarios, you also have to consider them and put them somehow later on into the development. So in general, to sum it up, the vehicle manufacturer has to show the competence that the overall vehicle operation is under control, and there is somehow a closed loop between the vehicle operation and the data coming from the vehicle operation will directly have also impact in the maintenance and the further development of the vehicle. Now we are coming to the core part, also physical testing. Physical testing will be still relevant, and already mentioned there will be different kind of testing. Number one is the mandatory tests. These are the tests which you can directly find in the EU level 4. This is requirements which are defined from the scenarios are defined in the EU requirement. There are also some reference to UNEC 157, and this is somehow the basic of the testing. On top, we will have the sample tests, which I shared already, coming out of the safety assessment. So if there are some findings within the safety assessment, this kind of findings will be considered during the sample tests specifically. Those of you which are familiar with functional safety, they will be somehow familiar with this kind of process. So fault injection test, etc., all will be reflected in that sample tests. And the real world testing. Yeah? This will be then really like a driver license test on real roads in order also to cover the different operational areas of the vehicle and check the vehicle in real world condition. So TÜV SÜD, I would say, is quite familiar with the physical proving ground testing, which will be also a core of the vehicle homologation process. And as I don't want to go through all the different scenarios which are listed up there, I implemented some videos into the presentation in order to give you somehow a feeling how this kind of scenario-based physical testing could look like. This is based by the Pegasus project, where our colleagues in Germany were responsible also for implementing the different test scenarios into real physical proving ground tests. So this is the traffic simulation vehicle as a target vehicle. Yes. Okay, then coming to the next pillar, which is the validation of simulation tools. Simulation, and I don't have to explain it, I guess, is a core instrument in order to evaluate the safety of autonomous vehicles and automated vehicles, as we will not be able to test physically each and every scenario, so we need somehow the support of the simulation in order to do so. EU Level 4 now has the first time also designated requirements for the trustworthiness of that simulation tools. So it's not only or no longer up to the manufacturer of the tool or of the manufacturer of the functions, but here somehow an independent assessment of the capability of the tool is necessary. So the proof is needed for the capability, for the modeling and the simulation. The proof is necessary for the accuracy. How good is the reproducibility? How correct is somehow the data flow and the algorithm? How about the usability? So is the staff using simulation tools, are they trained enough and capable enough in order to really provide here sufficient results? And how suitable is the modeling and simulation process for the purpose of type approval testing? So all of that will be checked during the type approval process, and only if this can be passed, somehow the results from the simulation can be also utilized as a safety argument later on. Just in order to show somehow what is the process, starting from the scenarios, so the specific scenarios which are considered. Doing the modeling means the vehicle itself, of course, the sensors, the vehicle environment, the driving conditions, put everything into the virtual test platform, which can be, where there's no limitation on that. And the simulation afterwards, then creating somehow the safety argumentation. This is the overall process flow for the virtual simulation and also the usage of that simulation data for the type approval process. What are the challenges for that? Of course, the complexity, the huge complexity, and especially if it comes to level 4, it's also about the the boundary conditions of the ODD, as somehow the vehicle itself will be responsible for the fallback. Solution are somehow scalable testing with scenario-based coverage. And here the legal aspect is virtual validation will become mandatory part of AV regulations, which we see here in the EU level 4. And only the trust can be ensured if we have somehow an independent assessment of the used tools and the tool chain in order to here ensure somehow a liability of the related test results. Coming now to the last point, the system type approval. So if everything else is passed, we are coming automatically to the system type approval. And coming to my last slide, it's also showing some complexity because after granting the approval, unfortunately I have to say, it will be not enough to operate the vehicle on the roads in Europe because, especially in Germany, there is one more obstacle. You also have to ensure that the traffic law is somehow considered for the vehicle, and for that you have to have a second approval process. So you have on the one hand side you're starting with the type approval coming from the EU law, and then you have to define, or you have to grant, or you have to get, I have to say, you have to get another approval from the road authority in order to operate. And this is called like the operating license. And the operating license is an independent process which is, I have to say, still necessary as long as the law for the driver license is localized. So the law for the driver license in Europe is not harmonized. So every member state in Europe has its own law for the driver license. And especially in Germany, this law is not allowing to operate AVs without having a certain permission on that. And this is something which will come up afterwards. After getting the type approval, you also have to manage the additional challenge in order to get the operational license. I have to say this is still early stage because we are in the first discussions now with the local authorities in order to grant it, but here we are still in a pilot phase. All in all, this was my last slide. I would say EU level 4 is really a big step forward, but on the other side, I hope you could also understand there are still some traps and some difficulties. But on the other side, we have to start this way because otherwise we will never come up with a suitable and I would say sufficient solution on that end. And TÜV SÜD is happy to support you on that way. So if you have any idea or plan to go on the European roads, please just contact us. Especially our team in Korea is more than suitable in order to support you on the way to European roads for level 4 technology. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.